My name is Evelyn Harper, and the night my husband pushed me to the floor on Christmas Eve, I learned how loud silence can be. I remember the sound, before anything else, the thud of my back hitting hardwood, the sharp breath leaving my lungs, the ornaments on the tree, rattling like they were startled too. For a second, I thought I'd broken something. I lay there, staring at the bottom branch of our artificial pine, the one with the crooked angel I'd bought at a church bazaar 20 years earlier. The room smelled like cinnamon and roasted ham. Bing Crosby was still crooning softly from the speaker in the corner. Christmas carried on even as I didn't. My husband Tom stood over me, his face flushed, his jaw set the way it got when he felt cornered. He didn't reach for me. He didn't say my name. He just exhaled annoyed, like I'd knocked something over. And then there was his mother. Margaret sat in her armchair near the window, hands folded neatly in her lap, ankles crossed. She watched me the way someone watches a commercial they don't like but won't mute. No gasp, no rising from her seat. No, "Are you all right?" Her eyes flicked briefly to Tom, then back to me, and settled there, cool, assessing, silent. That silence hurt more than the fall. Only after that moment did the rest of the night come rushing back to me, as if my mind needed to rewind to understand how we'd ended up there. It had been a typical Christmas Eve, by American standards. Nothing fancy, nothing extravagant. We lived in a modest ranch-style home outside Dayton, Ohio. The kind of neighborhood where people still waved when they pulled into their driveways and put out inflatable Santas, whether they believed in Christmas or not. I'd been hosting Christmas Eve dinner for decades. It was my thing, my role, my proof that I mattered. I'd started cooking at 8 that morning. Ham in the oven, green bean casserole, mashed potatoes, whipped smooth, with real butter, not margarine. Margaret liked things traditional. Tom liked things quiet. I liked things done right. Margaret had moved in with us 3 years earlier, after her arthritis worsened, and she decided her condo was too lonely. I'd agreed without hesitation. Family took care of family. That was how I was raised. That was how I lived. What no one seemed to notice was how much space she took up without ever asking. The argument that night hadn't started as an argument. It never did. It began with a comment, one of those small, sharp remarks that sound harmless if you weren't the one they were aimed at. "I thought you said dinner would be ready by 6, Margaret said, glancing at the clock. "It's 6:10, I replied evenly. The ham needed a little longer. Tom sighed, not loudly, just enough. "I told you timing was important tonight," he said. "Mom doesn't like waiting." Something in me snapped, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet fracture. I'd waited on everyone for years. Waited for appreciation. Waited for support. Waited for someone to notice how tired I was. "I'm doing the best I can," I said. "If that's not good enough—" "That's not what I said," Tom cut in his voice, rising. "Why do you always make everything about you?" Margaret shifted in her chair, but said nothing. The words stacked up after that one on top of another, until they toppled. Tom accused me of being sensitive. I accused him of being dismissive. He stepped closer. I stepped back. My heel caught the edge of the rug. And then his hands were on me. Not a punch, not a slap, a shove. Hard enough. I fell. Back in the present, lying on the floor, I felt the burn spreading across my shoulder blade. My pride stung worse. I pushed myself up slowly, using the coffee table for support. My hands were shaking, but I refused to let them see that. "I didn't mean to," Tom muttered. Not an apology, just a statement. Margaret cleared her throat. Well, she said finally, let's all calm down. It's Christmas. I looked at her then, really looked at her, at the woman I had planned to give a house to a small 2-bedroom place near the park fully paid for, meant to give her comfort and independence. A gift I'd been quietly arranging for months. A gesture of love. She met my gaze and looked away. No one asked if I was hurt. No one suggested ice or a chair or even a pause in the evening. Dinner was served. Plates were passed. Christmas resumed. I sat at the table with a dull ache in my back and something heavier settling in my chest. Across from me, Margaret ate quietly, nodding approvingly at the ham. Tom avoided my eyes. I realized then that falling hadn't changed anything for them, but it had changed everything for me. As I lay awake that night, listening to the hum of the furnace and the distant sound of a neighbor's late-night laughter, I thought about all the times I'd stayed silent to keep the peace. All the times I'd chosen comfort over truth. All the ways I'd mistaken patience for love. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. And clarity, I would soon learn, is far more dangerous than anger ever is. The house was never just a house. That was the thought that kept circling my mind in the days after Christmas, long after the bruises on my shoulder faded to yellow and green. I could hide the soreness with long sleeves and careful movements, but I couldn't hide the memory of Margaret's eyes as I lay on the floor, cool, patient, expectant. The house had been my idea. 2 years earlier, when Margaret's knees began to trouble her more seriously, she started dropping hints, nothing direct, just comments over morning coffee or during the evening news. Those stairs in my old condo were dangerous, she'd say. Renting at my age feels so uncertain. Some people don't think about their elders anymore. Tom would nod along, distracted flipping channels or checking his phone, and I would listen. I always listened. I had inherited money from my Aunt Helen, a careful woman who lived simply and left behind more than anyone expected. Not millions, but enough. Enough to pay off our mortgage early. Enough to save. Enough to help. I never told Margaret where the money came from. I didn't tell many people. In my generation, we were taught not to talk about money unless it was to complain about it. What I did talk about was family. I want her to feel secure, I told Tom one evening. Independent. Comfortable. He shrugged. If that's what you want. That should have been my first warning. Not gratitude, not curiosity, just indifference. I found the house in early spring, a modest ranch with a small fenced yard close to a pharmacy and a church. No stairs, wide doorways, quiet neighbors. It needed a little work, but nothing serious. I paid cash and put the deed in my name, planning to transfer it to Margaret as a Christmas gift once renovations were finished. I imagined her face when she saw it. Shock, relief, maybe even appreciation. I imagined wrong. Margaret never asked questions about the house because she assumed it would happen. The way some people assume dinner will be ready when they sit down. The way she assumed my labor, my time, my care were simply part of the arrangement. She began talking about her place months before I ever mentioned it aloud. When I move, she said once, I'll need the bedroom facing east. Better for my joints. I remember standing at the sink, rinsing dishes, my hands submerged in warm water. I remember thinking, she doesn't even know yet. But she knew. People like Margaret always know. After Christmas, the house became the quiet elephant in the room. No one mentioned it directly, but it hovered over every interaction. Tom grew tense whenever the subject of finances came up. Margaret became overly polite, which somehow felt worse than her usual bluntness. One afternoon, a week after Christmas, Margaret knocked on my bedroom door. "I wanted to check on you," she said, standing just inside the doorway. That fall looked unpleasant. I waited. She shifted her weight. Tom didn't mean it. I said nothing. She sighed. "These things happen in families." That's all I asked. Her lips tightened. "What more do you want? An apology?" I met her gaze. "I wanted you to help me up." She looked genuinely confused. I didn't think it was my place. That was when I understood. Silence wasn't neutrality to her. It was alignment. That night, I pulled out the folder I'd kept in my desk drawer. Deeds, contracts, receipts, the paperwork that told the real story of who owned what. I reviewed everything carefully, slowly the way I used to balance checkbooks before online banking existed. The house was mine, entirely, legally, unquestionably. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. Over the next few days, Tom tried to smooth things over. He cooked dinner once. He asked how my shoulder was. He suggested we put Christmas behind us. I asked him one question. If it happened again, I said, "Would you stop yourself?" He hesitated, just for a moment, but it was enough. Margaret, meanwhile, began planning aloud. Furniture she wanted to bring. Curtains she preferred. A neighbor she'd already spoken to someone she claimed lived 2 houses down from her future place. I listened. I nodded. I said nothing. That silence was new for me. Intentional. Focused. By early January, the renovations on the house were complete. New flooring, updated bathroom, grab bars installed. It was ready. So was I. I scheduled an appointment with my attorney, a woman I'd known for years. She reviewed everything, asked a few pointed questions, and then leaned back in her chair. "You're allowed to change your mind," she said gently. I nodded. "I know." When I returned home, Margaret was in the living room, watching television. Tom was at work. I stood there for a moment, taking in the familiar scene. The woman who had watched me fall, the house I had built my life in, the gift I had almost given away without conditions. I realized something then. Generosity without boundaries isn't kindness. It's permission. And I was done giving it. The bruise on my shoulder faded slowly, but the silence stayed sharp. In the weeks after Christmas, our house felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just heavier. Every room carried what hadn't been said. Tom moved around me carefully, like someone navigating a cracked sidewalk, unsure where the weak spots were. Margaret carried on as usual, tea at 9, television at noon, bed, before the late news, as if nothing had happened at all. That was the part I struggled with most. If she had yelled at me, I could have argued back. If she had defended her son openly, I could have confronted her. But she did neither. She chose the safest position available to her stillness. Silence, I was learning, was not empty. It was full of decisions. One morning, I reached for a mug in the cabinet and felt a twinge in my shoulder. Not pain memory. My hand froze midair. I could still see the angle of the floor, the blur of lights, the way no one rushed toward me. I set the mug down and sat at the table, suddenly exhausted. Margaret shuffled in a few minutes later. "Good morning," she said, pleasant as ever. "Morning," I replied. She poured herself tea and sat across from me. We watched the steam rise between us. "You know," she said casually, "Tom has always had a temper. He gets it from his father." I looked up. "His father never pushed me." She waved a hand. "Men express themselves differently." There it was. the excuse, delivered softly, like wisdom. And women, I asked. She raised an eyebrow. What about women? How are we supposed to express ourselves? I asked. By staying quiet. She studied me for a moment. By keeping the family together. That sentence landed hard. I thought of all the times I had swallowed my feelings to avoid tension. All the holidays I'd smoothed over. All the apologies I'd made just to move things along. Keeping the family together had always meant bending. Never being bent toward. Tom came home early that afternoon. He found me in the laundry room, folding towels. Mom says you've been distant, he said. I didn't look up. I fell on the floor. He sighed. We've been over this. No, I said. We haven't. He leaned against the doorframe. What do you want me to do, Evelyn? It happened. We can't change it. I want you to acknowledge it, I said quietly. I want you to tell me it wasn't acceptable. He was silent. There it was again, that pause, that calculation. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said finally, but you were yelling. I set the towel down carefully. I was talking. He shook his head. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. And just like that, I understood. To him, the problem wasn't the push. It was my refusal to move past it. That evening, Margaret called me into the living room. I think it would be best, she said, hands folded neatly, if we all stopped revisiting that night. Dwelling only breeds resentment. Resentment comes from being ignored, I replied. She frowned. I didn't ignore you. You watched, I said, and did nothing. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I didn't want to interfere between a husband and wife. I felt something settle into place inside me then. Not anger, certainty. When you do nothing, I said slowly, you choose a side. She looked away. That was the closest thing to acknowledgement I would get. Over the next few days, I noticed the subtle shifts. Margaret stopped asking how the renovations were going, but she didn't stop assuming the outcome. Tom stopped mentioning the house altogether. It was as if they both believed that silence would eventually wear me down the way it always had before. But something was different now. I wasn't looking for a fight. I wasn't rehearsing speeches in my head. I wasn't trying to be understood. I was observing. I watched how Margaret spoke to Tom, how she framed her expectations as needs. I watched how Tom deferred to her comfort without once checking mine. I watched how easily my pain became an inconvenience. And I began to ask myself a question I had avoided for years. If I give this house away, what am I really rewarding? The answer came easily. I would be rewarding a shove, a silence, a pattern. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the steady rhythm of Tom's breathing. I thought about my Aunt Helen, who had lived alone by choice after her husband died. Never make yourself smaller to keep the peace, she told me once. Peace built on silence isn't peace. At the time, I'd smiled and changed the subject. Now her words felt like instruction. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet. I only knew what I would no longer accept. And for the first time since Christmas night, the silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt like space. The decision didn't arrive all at once. It formed slowly, the way ice thickens on a pond, quiet, steady, inevitable. By mid-January, the holiday decorations were back in their boxes. The tree had been dragged to the curb, its needles brittle and brown. Life on the surface returned to routine. Tom went to work. Margaret watched her programs. I cooked, cleaned, and moved through the house with practiced efficiency. But inside me something had shifted. I stopped explaining myself. When Margaret hinted about downsizing soon, I nodded and changed the subject. When Tom mentioned how hard it was for his mother to feel unsettled at her age, I listened without responding. My silence confused them. They were used to my reassurance, my smoothing things over, my willingness to absorb discomfort so others didn't have to. This silence was different. It wasn't passive. It was deliberate. One morning after Tom left for work and Margaret settled into her chair, I took my coat and keys and drove across town. The winter sky was low and gray, the roads salted and slushy. I parked outside a brick office building with my attorney's name etched neatly on the glass door. I'd known Linda for over 20 years. She'd helped me with my aunt's estate, reviewed wills, and answered questions I was always slightly embarrassed to ask. When I told her I needed to talk about a property transfer, she raised an eyebrow, but said nothing until we were seated. I explained everything: the Christmas night, the shove, the silence, the house. She listened without interrupting her expression, calm but focused. "And the gift was never finalized?" she asked. "No," I said. "The deed is still in my name." She nodded. "Then you're under no obligation." "I know," I said. "I just want to be sure." She leaned forward slightly. "Evelyn, changing your mind doesn't make you cruel. It makes you responsive to new information." That sentence stayed with me. Before I left, she asked one more question. "Are you doing this to punish them?" she asked gently. I thought about it. Really thought. "No," I said. "I'm doing it to stop punishing myself." When I got home, Margaret was in the kitchen, flipping through a magazine. "You're back early," she said. "I had an appointment," I replied. "With whom?" she asked casually. "A lawyer." She paused, just briefly. "Oh, yes." I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. That evening, Tom noticed the change too. "You've been quiet lately," he said over dinner. "So have you," I replied. He frowned. "That's not fair." "Neither was pushing me," I said calmly. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The argument he expected didn't arrive. "I don't know what you want from me," he said. "I want you to understand that things don't go back to normal just because time passes," I said. "Normal only works when everyone feels safe." He pushed his food around on his plate. "Mom's been asking when she can see the house again." There it was, the assumption still intact. "I haven't decided," I said. He looked up sharply. "What do you mean you haven't decided?" "I mean exactly that," I replied. "I'm still thinking." Margaret didn't join us for dessert that night. I could hear her television murmuring in the living room as I washed dishes. I felt strangely steady, as if a line had been drawn, and I was standing firmly on my side of it. Over the next few days, Margaret tried a different approach. She brought me tea, asked if my shoulder still hurt, commented on how hard families have it these days. I listened. I thanked her. I said nothing more. What she never did was apologize. Not for her silence, not for her assumptions, not for watching me fall. And that told me everything I needed to know. One afternoon, while sorting through old paperwork in my desk drawer, I found a handwritten note from my Aunt Helen tucked into a folder. "Be generous," it read, "but never at the expense of your dignity." I smiled. Then I closed the folder and placed it back carefully. The house sat empty, across town, clean and ready, a symbol of everything I had planned and everything I was now reconsidering. I drove by it once, parked across the street, and sat there for a while. It looked peaceful, solid, unclaimed. I realized then that I didn't owe anyone an explanation yet. I didn't need to announce my decision. I could take my time. I could choose clarity over haste. Revenge, I was learning, didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it was just the quiet act of saying no, and that no once spoken would change everything. I chose a Tuesday morning to cancel the gift. There was nothing special about the day. No dramatic weather, no holiday. just a gray winter sky and the low hum of traffic outside our kitchen window. I'd learned over the years that life-changing decisions rarely announce themselves with fanfare. They slip in quietly, dressed like ordinary moments. Tom was at work. Margaret sat in the living room, knitting something blue and shapeless, while the morning news played at a low volume. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, letting the warmth settle into my hands. I had already made the call. The title company confirmed the paperwork. The attorney drafted a short, clean notice withdrawing any intent to transfer ownership. No accusations, no explanations, just facts. The house would remain mine. For a few minutes, I sat there, listening to the rhythm of needles clicking together. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. I felt calm in a way I hadn't felt in years. "Margaret," I said. She looked up. "Yes. I need to tell you something." She set her knitting aside and gave me her full attention. That alone told me she sensed a shift. "The house," I said, "I'm not giving it to you." Her face went still. "I'm sorry," she said. "I've decided not to transfer the house," I repeated. "It will remain in my name." For a moment, she didn't react at all. Then her expression tightened, as if she were bracing against a draft. "Is this about Christmas?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "and about what followed." She leaned back in her chair. "That's quite an overreaction." I nodded. "You're entitled to your opinion." Her eyes narrowed. "You're punishing me for something my son did." "I'm responding to what you didn't do," I said evenly. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I watched her weigh her words. "I raised him," she said finally. "I won't apologize for that." "I didn't ask you to," I replied. She stood abruptly. "You know how hard it is to be dependent at my age." "I do," I said. "That's why I wanted to help." And now she snapped. "Now I'm choosing not to." She stared at me, as if she were seeing me for the first time. Not as the accommodating daughter-in-law, not as the host, not as the background support, but as someone separate, someone solid. Tom came home early that afternoon. Margaret met him in the hallway before he'd even set down his coat. "She's taking it away," she said, voice sharp with disbelief. Tom looked at me. "What's she talking about?" "I canceled the gift," I said. "The house." His face flushed. "You can't just do that." "I can," I replied. And I did. He ran a hand through his hair. "Mom was counting on that." "I was counting on respect," I said. "This is petty," he said. "You're holding a grudge." I met his gaze. "I'm setting a boundary." He laughed bitterly. "Over one mistake." "One shove," I said, "and years of silence." Margaret interjected. "Tom, tell her this isn't right." He turned to her. "Mom, let me handle this." I stood. "No, you've handled enough." The room fell quiet. I could hear the refrigerator hum the tick of the wall clock. Ordinary sounds in an extraordinary moment. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I said. "I'm doing this to stop hurting myself." Tom's anger gave way to something else, fear maybe. Or loss. "You'd really take a house away from my mother?" he asked. "I never gave it to her," I said. "I almost did. That was my mistake." Margaret sat down slowly, her confidence faltering for the first time. "Where am I supposed to go?" "You live here," I said. "For now." She looked up sharply. "For now." "I'm not making any promises today," I replied. That night I slept deeply, not because everything was resolved, but because it finally had direction. The decision was no longer a thought or a plan. It was real. The gift was canceled. And for the first time, I understood that reclaiming something you almost gave away can feel like getting your life back. The fallout didn't explode, the way I thought it might. It spread instead quietly through phone calls, side conversations, and glances that lingered a second too long. Within days, word had traveled. Tom's sister called first. She didn't ask how I was. She asked what I was thinking. "Mom's devastated," she said. "You've embarrassed her." I listened, holding the phone away from my ear, just enough to soften the edge in her voice. "I fell on the floor in my own living room," I said. When she paused, that didn't seem to embarrass anyone. She went silent. Then she changed the subject. Others followed. A cousin, an old family friend. Each conversation followed the same pattern: sympathy for Margaret, discomfort around me, and a careful avoidance of the word push. Tom grew increasingly restless. He slept poorly, paced the house, snapped at small things. One evening, he finally sat across from me at the kitchen table, elbows, planted hands, clasped like he was preparing for a negotiation. "You've turned everyone against me," he said. I shook my head. "I didn't turn anyone against you. I stopped protecting you." "That's not fair," he said. "You know how my family is." "Yes," I replied. "I do." He looked at me, then, not angrily, but searchingly. "What do you want?" It was the first honest question he'd asked me in years. "I want accountability," I said. "Not excuses, not silence. Accountability." "For what?" he asked. "For putting your hands on me," I said, "and for choosing comfort over decency afterward." He swallowed. "I lost my temper." "And I lost my trust," I replied. Margaret, meanwhile, retreated into herself. She stopped knitting, stopped commenting, stopped making tea. The silence she'd once used as armor now wrapped around her like a blanket. One afternoon, she knocked on my door. "I suppose you're pleased," she said, standing stiffly in the hallway. "About what?" I asked. She gestured vaguely. "All this. The tension. The way things are." "I'm not pleased," I said. "I'm honest." She hesitated. "I never meant for things to go this far." "That's the problem," I said gently. "You never meant for anything. You just watched." Her shoulders sagged slightly. I didn't know what to do. "You could have stood up," I said. "You could have said my name." She looked down at her hands. For the first time, they trembled. "I was afraid," she admitted, "of losing my son." I nodded slowly, and I was afraid of losing myself. That was the closest we came to understanding in that moment. A week later, Tom asked if we could see a counselor. The request surprised me, not because it came, but because it came without conditions. "I don't want to be this man," he said quietly, "the one who hurts his wife and pretends it didn't happen." I agreed, not out of forgiveness, but out of curiosity. Change, I knew, had to be demonstrated, not promised. The sessions were uncomfortable. Tom struggled to sit with criticism. I struggled to speak without softening my words. But something shifted when the counselor asked him a simple question. "When your mother stayed silent," she asked, "what did that communicate to your wife?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "That I didn't matter," I said. He nodded slowly. "That you didn't matter." Margaret didn't attend those sessions, but she felt their impact. Tom stopped deflecting. He stopped minimizing. And for the first time, he told her plainly that her silence had cost him something. She didn't argue. She just listened. Weeks passed. The house remained empty, untouched, waiting. One evening in early spring, Margaret sat beside me on the porch. "I don't expect the house anymore," she said quietly. I looked at her. "Why not?" "Because I understand now," she said. "It was never about the house. It was about what I failed to do." I didn't respond right away. "I don't know what reconciliation looks like yet," I said finally. "But it starts with honesty." She nodded. "I can try." And for the first time Since Christmas night, I believed her. Not completely, but enough. Enough to keep talking, enough to keep going, enough to let consequences teach what words never had. Spring came quietly that year. The kind of spring that doesn't announce itself with blossoms all at once, but with small mercies longer light. In the evenings, the sound of lawnmowers starting up again, neighbors opening windows, life easing forward, whether you're ready or not. I spent more time walking then, around the block, past the park, sometimes just to the end of the driveway and back. Movement helped me think, and thinking helped me understand what had happened, not just on Christmas night, but in all the years leading up to it. Tom kept going to counseling, on his own and with me. He stopped defending his behavior with explanations. He stopped using the word "but." That mattered more than any apology ever could. One evening after dinner, he sat across from me and said, "I've spent my life confusing loyalty with silence." I didn't respond right away. I let the words settle. Loyalty, he continued, is standing up when someone is hurt. Silence is just easier. I nodded. Easier doesn't make it right. Margaret changed, too slowly, awkwardly, in ways that didn't always look graceful. She began asking instead of assuming. She knocked before entering rooms. She apologized once clumsily about Christmas. "I should have helped you up," she said. "I see that now." It wasn't perfect, it wasn't cinematic, but it was real. As for the house, I didn't rush to decide its fate. It remained mine, untouched, waiting. Not as leverage, not as punishment, but as a reminder. A reminder that generosity should never come at the cost of safety. That love without boundaries turns into obligation. That silence, when it protects harm, becomes harm itself. Eventually, I rented the house to a retired school teacher, a woman my age, who needed a fresh start after losing her husband. She baked me cookies as a thank you and told me stories about her students. It felt right, useful, alive. Margaret didn't ask about it. She didn't need to. One afternoon in early December, nearly a year after that Christmas night, she sat beside me at the kitchen table. "I was wrong," she said simply, "about more than I knew." I looked at her hands, older now, slower, but no longer clenched. "We all were," I said. Christmas came again, as it always does. We didn't host a big dinner that year. No expectations, no performances, just the three of us, a smaller tree, and a quieter house. When I hung the crooked angel ornament, I noticed Tom watching me. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. That night, as we sat together, I realized something important. Reconciliation isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering clearly, without denial, without excuses, and choosing to move forward anyway. I didn't get my revenge the way people imagine it. There was no shouting, no public humiliation, no dramatic exit. What I reclaimed was far more valuable. My voice, my boundaries, my dignity. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself lying on the floor of your own life while others look away, I want you to hear this clearly. Silence is not peace. Endurance is not love. And generosity does not mean erasing yourself. It is never too late to draw a line. It is never selfish to protect your safety. And it is never wrong to say, "This ends here." If this story made you pause, if it reminded you of something you've lived through, or something you're still living through, I invite you to reflect on it. Share it with someone who might need it. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about finding strength, quietly about justice, without shouting, consider staying with me. Some lessons come late in life, but they still come in time.